Okay, so what the audience that you guys are going to be is this is a congregation of farmers and ranchers in Colorado, and you are attending a conference to essentially just implement ways that could make your farm or your ranch more advantageous to yourself. And so essentially we are Cowboy Consulting. We were brought in specifically to talk about water rights and how that will pertain to you personally and from a, I guess, an advantageous standpoint. And so so hello everyone, we are Cowboy Consulting based out of Denver, Colorado. I am Zane Alley.
I'm Rebecca Donnelly.
Nana McCrae.
And Greg Ashley.
And we are here today to talk to you about buy and dry on the Colorado Front Range. As farmers and ranchers, you not only have a large amount of land, but a large amount of responsibility. And a time may come, or a time may have already come, where you were approached about selling your water rights. We are here today to inform you of the legal, financial, and ethical implications that go behind making this decision. And so to start, what is buy and dry? Buy and dry is the practice of selling your water rights to thirsty cities and municipalities. This practice started in the 1840s with Utah farmers and ranchers fighting for irrigation rights, and has slowly but surely progressed to the buy and dry of today. Since 1987, 191,000 acre-feet of water have been sold to Colorado suburbs and urbanizing communities. That's enough water to fill the Chatfield Reservoir 9 times or to sustain 1.5 million people for a little over a year. It is projected that those averages will go from anywhere from 500,000 to 700,000 acre-feet by the year 2050. With the world's population increasing from 7.3 billion to 8.5 billion people by the year 2030, irrigated farmlands and agricultural communities are going to be needed now more than ever. Colorado's agricultural communities is a force to be reckoned with, generating more than $5 billion in economic output annually, and that's not even counting local businesses selling their products to over 100 foreign countries. Colorado's agricultural community is an industry we cannot afford nor want to lose in the near future. Some perspective points I have attached for you today is one, the Chatfield Reservoir, which is 2.82 miles in circumference. I also have 2 photos of the same cornfield. Now one is before irrigation and freshly plowed in order to restore nitrogen to the soil, and the other is after irrigation in full bloom. Now this just really puts into perspective how much water is needed to produce something as simple as 1 bushel of corn, which is right around 2,500 gallons of water. And I also have attached an acre-foot example in the bottom right-hand corner. This is also located in your booklet with a brief description if it is needed. And with that, I will pass it to Rebecca for legal analysis.
Okay, so first off, I'd like to say that there is no legal obligation when selling your water rights to look at how it affects the community and the environment. With that being said, I will go in and talk about how the prior appropriation goes into this, regulations, and feasibility and efficiency. Prior appropriation is best known by the phrase first in time is first in right. With this being said, there are 3 dimensions that go into prior appropriation. The first is beneficial use, which is the appropriate, reasonable, and efficient use of your water. You also need to make sure that the appropriation is being used towards what it was legally approved for. The second piece of prior appropriation is continuous use, which is the uninterrupted use of your water rights. If you were to interrupt your use of your water right, you have to neglect using your water for 12 months or more. The third piece is the real diversion from a stream or a natural stream. This is no longer necessary due to the modernization of prior appropriation. We also look at some of the outcomes that prior appropriation has developed, and that is that the water and the land are separate, which means you can sell your water rights separate from the land, which comes into our solution of leasing the water rights and keeping it with the land. I'm going to talk about the Big Thompson Project, which is a federal water diversion that was solely created for agricultural purposes. But recently, the majority of the water has been diverted to municipal and industrial uses due to the population growth in Colorado. When looking at this, we see that now it has really affected how agricultural land is being used and how much water is being diverted towards those purposes. Moving on to the regulations, the Colorado Doctrine of Prior Appropriation was created in 1874, and as early as 1864, if you were trying to divert water, you had to make sure that no one had priority over you, which shows how long this has been affecting the agricultural resources. The environment is affected by many organizations. One of the things that has affected it is that the Clinton administration Clean Water Plan has focused on strong standards for clean water as well as how to prevent polluted runoff. There are also 8 other examples in your booklet that the Clinton administrated Clean Water Plan has focused on. But I want to look at how the organizations have really focused on how to get Americans clean water, but they have not looked at how it affects the environment to pull the water from it. Now, the failure to look at the environmental effects can lead to getting rid of annual water supplies that had previously been given to the land for decades before. This also stops production of agricultural food, which affects both the wildlife and humans. In the feasibility and efficiency category, we see that it is needed for the government and the communities to work together to find a sustainable solution. Some of the political aspects is that they can come step in and help the ranchers and the leasers create formulated plans to successfully divert the water. They can financially support the diversions by helping create water diversions that move the water from the agricultural land to the municipals or industries. They can also perform mandatory quality checks to keep both parties accountable for the water they are diverting. They can also create resource policies to make sure that the water that is being diverted is going to the different parties equally and efficiently. Some ways the community can help is that they have technology available that can help make the water distribution more efficient. And the more that they support the agricultural lands, the more that the water will be dispersed efficiently. They can also support development by making sure that the water stays with the land and helping ranchers support their agricultural purposes and businesses. With those two working together, we can find ways to sufficiently and effectively divert water to everywhere that needs the water. And moving on to the financial analysis with Nina.
By the year 2030, there's going to be about a 40% shortage of water between supply and demand. This is why municipal governments are one of the main buyers in water rights from farmers and ranchers. In the year 2015, about 80% of the water rights that were purchased from municipal governments or from real estate buyers. They were buying these water rights to fulfill the shortage of water that was in their cities for their citizens. They were buying a square acre foot of water for about $13,800. One ways that farmers and ranchers can fulfill their need for money without having to sell their water rights is by what is called a Colorado conservation easement. This is a tax break that they can do, and it has federal, state, and property taxes. And in your booklet, it has a little bit of explanation on each of them. But one of the biggest benefits, I think, is a property tax. If you have a farm or ranch that is under 80 acres, it keeps you categorized as an agricultural classification. And so it keeps you in that classification instead of one of the higher classifications, instead of a commercial or anything else. Now, what a conservation easement is the Colorado open lands, they put a hold on your land and prevents any form of development on your land, and so they can't do any kind of building or anything like that on it, but they have no say in the management or day-to-day activity of your land. This also prevents them from having any say in mortgaging, leasing, or selling of your land. Some of the main lands that are on conservation easements are working farms and ranches, wildlife habitats, and scenic views from public roads and entries near public roads. Is it better to sell or lease your water rights? One of the pros to selling your water rights is if you are in a financial bind. If a farmer or rancher, if you needed capital immediately, it would be beneficial to sell your water rights. But then you no longer have water rights and you have that money now, but then you're kind of at a win-loss because that water rights is gone and you can't get it back unless you were to buy them back. So it's kind of how you see it as a farmer. Another pro would be is that the way water rights work is if you use them or you lose them. So if you're only using about 75% of the water rights you have each year, and that 25% is just not getting used, it could cause a kind of a legal battle if another farmer down the river were to find out about that, because they get upset because they might need that water and it's just kind of going to waste each season. So, or the government could come in and take that water away from you and then it's just at a loss. So if you're just constantly not using that 25% of your water rights, selling them could be very beneficial to you. Another pro to selling your water rights is back to prior appropriation. If you wanted older water rights and you had a more junior water right, you could sell your junior water rights to buy an older water right, because in a dry season you are guaranteed water with an older water right, but then you're selling a junior and buying older water rights. The negative side to selling your water rights is the surrounding economy and a farming community, they all rely on each other. So once you sell your water rights, you might not be thinking about who you're impacting by not having those water rights. A lot of times, if your farm is no longer working as strong or you're not having as much agriculture that year, other businesses might end up having to go under and might not be able to have as much business because you're not having as much business. One of the plus sides to leasing your land is to have more water efficiencies that year. So if you were to lease out some of your water rights, one year you could get a new drip irrigation system, which in turn reuses less water, and then you have capital coming in from that water rights that you're leasing, and then the next year you might be able to buy a new canal lining, and the next year do something else to make your farm or ranch run more efficiently, and by the time you're done paying off all of those, you in turn get all of your water rights back, and you have a more efficient running farm. Another pro to leasing your water rights is back to the use it or lose it. Say one year you're using 75%, so you can lease that 25%. The next year maybe you need 80% of your water, so you can lease that 20%. You have ultimate control over how much water you need and how much you can lease, and you're still gaining money in return. When you are leasing though, there's some major things you need to think about in your agreements, and that's the price. So you have control over how much the price is and how much water you are going to lease to that person. So you can remember that it's your call and how much. And one of the biggest things is the prior appropriation date, because if there isn't water and you have a junior date, then you don't get water and the person you're leasing to doesn't get water. But if you have an older date and there is water and it's a dry year, you get water as well as who you're leasing to. And it determines the price. With an older date, your water is worth a lot more money than with a junior date, as well as the duration. When it comes to water, a lot of times it's seasonal because people are farming more in the spring and fall than they are in the winter. So if you are making a lease, it's not so much year to year, but more seasonal. Another reason people are trying to sell off their water rights is because of the expenses it costs to make their farm more efficient. So they think selling their water rights, it's more beneficial because they get that capital immediately because it is so expensive. For a 10-acre farm to get installed a new drip irrigation system, it costs approximately $120,000. And then to get a geomembrane canal lining, On that same 10 acres would be about $15,000. To get a laser level is $28,000, which is, it comes out to be approximately $140,000 on just 10 acres to have these installed. So people are selling their water rights to get all these done, when in reality, if they just leased off some of their water rights, they could do these year by year and then still have all their water rights once they have an efficiently ran farm and their water is being used more efficiently. And next we're going to go into the ethical issues.
All right, so in this region of the country, there are a set of principles I'm sure all of you have come to know and perhaps even strive to live according to. These principles are known as the Code of the West. The Code of the West has long defined the individuals of the state who have poured their blood, sweat, and tears into the crops that they have farmed and the land that they have farmed. In this case, as we look at the ethical implications surrounding this issue, there are two of these principles that we need to keep in mind in particular. The first one being to remember that some things aren't for sale, and the second one being to know where to draw the line. The first issue we see in our state with water are municipalities and companies coming to you farmers and offering you large sums of money for your land and its assets. Their sole purpose in doing so is to drain the land of its water to move it to more thirsty growing communities. This, however, is a two-way road because although you may have no legal obligations to turn these offers away, you have an ethical obligation to consider the future generations and their well-being. The next issue we see in this case are lawmakers approaching these water acts and water laws with a utilitarian approach in mind. This aims to provide the most good for the most people. However, what has been overlooked for far too long are the long-term effects that these tactics are having on our state's future food supply and its land. The utilitarian approach is the right approach to use when we face water rights and water acts. However, when using this approach, we need to take into consideration the future generations and use those in the view of the greater population. In doing so, it becomes abundantly clear that buy and dry is doing more harm than it is causing good, which stems back to remembering some things aren't for sale for you farmers, because our water rights ultimately should not be sold. They should be leased rather than being sold, because our future food supply will not be hurting as much. As our state's population continues to grow exponentially, more municipalities may be approaching all of you and offering you these large sums of money for your water rights. It is vital that you understand the responsibility that you have with your water and what you do with it. We need to remember that future generations should not be paying for what we do now. From 1997 to 2012 alone, we saw 850,000 acres of irrigated farmland lost due to these buy and dry tactics. This is approximately 25% of our state's irrigated farmland. At that rate, we're going to have a hole dug for ourselves so much quicker, a hole dug so much deeper that we cannot return from, and in turn be harming our future generations and their welfare. And as farmers who may be struggling to make ends meet, you need to look past the financial benefit that you can receive now and consider your kids and possibly your grandkids and what they will be needing to go about their lives. With that being said, we at Cowboy Consulting have 3 alternatives and recommendations for you to take advantage of that help to contribute to the sustainability of our state's land and its farming industry. The first of these being conservation easements. Conservation easements, as we touched on earlier, are essentially protective restrictions put on land to help preserve its assets or the land itself. Although these do not provide the same financial benefits that selling your water rights do, they do, however, provide you with tax benefits, and more specifically, they provide you with great property tax benefits. The next alternative and recommendation that you can take advantage of are finding more water-efficient crops and farming methods. Perhaps the most water-efficient farming method that you can take advantage of is implementing an irrigation drip system into your land. Combined with precision irrigation, which is a technology that's being developed right now, we can ultimately target where we need more water based on how the soil is on a year-to-year basis. Now, we understand that these 2 options may not provide the financial benefit and relief that you're in search of, which is why we ultimately recommend that you lease your water. By leasing your water rights, you're able to continue your day-to-day operations while still leasing your water out and giving the water that you're not using away to municipalities and companies that are looking to meet the needs for the greater communities. You're able to continue your day-to-day operations on your farm while still helping the municipalities that need water for their citizens. A great example of this in our state is the Arkansas Valley Super Ditch. The Arkansas Valley Super Ditch is a congregation of water rights amongst farmers in which the farmers contribute minimal amounts of water to help feed the thirst that the growing communities need. In this experiment, farmers are seeing on average about $500 per acre foot of water, accompanied by a $150 readiness to serve fee per acre. Also, in this experiment, the farmers that have opted to lease their water out and send it away have found opportunities in lease fallowing their land, such as implementing drip systems and perhaps even laser leveling their land to ultimately make their future crops more efficient and more fruitful. In this experiment, they also have placed regulations to help ensure the safety of the land and to help with the preservation of the farmland in our state. One of these regulations is that on any given year, no more than 30% of the land that is in the experiment can be lease fallowed, meaning that no more than 30% of the land can have water taken from it and not farmed on that year. This is just one of about 30 regulations placed on the experiment in order to help preserve the land. With that being said, the Arkansas Valley Super Ditch is just one example of the benefits that you can have, as well as the municipalities that need water can have from leasing your water. It allows you to continue your day-to-day operations while still receiving a steady income from leasing your water. With that being said, we're going to turn it over to Zane, and he will wrap this up for you.
Thank you, Greg. So now that all of you have some information on whether or not to sell your water rights, let's recap. Legally, there are no laws binding you to sell or not to sell your water rights. However, you were given an extensive history on the battle to keep the water rights in the state. Now we need to take it one step further in fighting to keep those water rights within their communities for the betterment of generations to come. Also, financially, it makes the most sense to have small yet consistent incomes where you still can run day-to-day operations rather than a large one-time sum that leads to you selling your water rights and inevitably maybe farming or irrigating never the same again. And finally, ethically, ethically, again, nothing is obligating you to sell your water rights or not to sell your water rights. But what you need to consider are the generations of our great state. As we said before, this could be your grandchildren or even your great-grandchildren fighting a battle that we may fail to solve now. And we want to stress that we don't want you to turn your backs on the urbanizing communities, but rather look towards our future. Understand that feeding generations to come with some income is better than dead resourceful land and a heavy wallet. We want to thank you for your time, and we hope this leads to an informed decision, and we are now open for questions.
Well, thank you very much, and we appreciate your coming down and talking to us. But, you know, I have a couple of kids who left the farm early and went off to the University of Wyoming. And when they were there, they learned that this business of tiny little farms it's hundreds of years old. It is so outdated that I don't see what the big fuss is about. I mean, people all live in the cities. They're the ones that need the water. Who cares?
Well, and see, one of the biggest things that, as we had a couple of statistics in there, by the year 2030, our population is supposed to spike from 7.3 billion to 8.5 billion people. So while that may occur as a dying industry as of right now, we are soon to realize that this industry is going to be needed more than ever. And essentially, it's going to need more technology advancements and more population advancements, if you will, now more than ever as well.
What percentage of farmers or wherever location you study lease versus buy or lease versus sell now their water?
So currently, I think it's around 12%, which is a number that has been increasing because we've been seeing the effects that the selling is having on our land. I mean, like since 1997 to 2012, 850,000 acres were lost of farmland, which, I mean, farmers are starting to take note because at that rate, we're not going to have enough farmland to produce food and goods for the population to eat and essentially also continue to have our state's economic well-being because it is such a huge contributor.
Right. So is leasing just it's a harder option to access, or was it just more popular, less popular?
So a lot of people that are selling their water rights in our state are either farmers that are just in such a financial hole that they see no other option, or ones that are approaching retirement and are just, they don't have any kids or anything that are trying to take over their farm, so they almost use it as like a retirement fund, which like we understand that, and we understand that sometimes like we're in tough positions. However, speaking on ethics and specifically, we have to consider the future generations. If all of our farmers were to get to the end of their lives and just sell their water rights and to allow municipalities to move the water, we're not going to have enough food to supply what our future with our population's growth. We're not going to have enough food to feed them.
Just buy the food at Kroger's.
You know,
Gotta come from somewhere.
I mean, all of your farms, I'm sure, I mean, you guys farm them year round and every year. I mean, you know how important it is to get that surplus and have fruitful crops to move it to those stores for our citizens to buy.
And also to add on to this is it is a relatively new theory as well, and a lot of farmers they are not aware of their opportunities to lease them, which is why we came to this conference to start putting it into people's minds if they are in these financial burdens.
So leasing is the new component? Is that what you just said?
No, so just this issue is kind of the new component, because it's escalated just in the past 20 or so years, probably 30. Just the issue of how many people have started to sell their water rights. Because we went through just small droughts in our state that have ultimately left people with lower income in years because they haven't been able to have as fruitful crops.
Right.
And larger cities are needing more water, and so there's a larger demand for the municipal governments to come out and buy it. And there's a lot of times when we were looking into it, you'd go into a website and you would look at spots of land, and it would literally just say no image, and it would say 100 acres, and then how many water rights were attached to that. And nobody even cares what the land looks like. All they care about is how many water rights are there. Because they probably will never even go look at even where the land is. All they want is how much water is attached to it, because they're just going to move those water rights to wherever they are at.
With his point earlier about his sons at University of Wyoming, it seems like more and more generations go by, probably less, I'm not from that area, but are less on the land? Coming to work the land, be farmers, or?
That is correct. So essentially what's happening is this is not our area of expertise, but education is increasing at higher education. A lot of people want to go to the city and get those jobs. And so yes, ranchers are less and less likely. But as we said before, from more of a financial standpoint, as populations increase, people are going to see monetary values grow drastically in those sectors again. And so essentially what we're saying right now is yes, there is a downfall in ranchers and people willing to take that up, but we know for a fact that in years to come it's going to blow up.
I mean, I can definitely see the benefit as a farm owner myself. I was but I have read a lot recently about agriculture. It's an up and coming field, and just because there is a demand for good food, organic food, in the cities, and so there is that need to farm it correctly and have the right resources to do so. And then I also know that water is also a scarce resource, and it's going to be. I mean, man, we're going to fight for water like we fight for oil right now. It's going to be a lot, coming up soon. So I can understand the need for water rights. I also appreciate you informing us of the leasing option, because I almost see it as an economic model that flexes to supply demand, and it does give us farmers more opportunity to work with price flexibility, and also just kind of seasonally, depending on what we're seeing in terms of growth and demand, work with our water supply and demand also with so it gives us a little more power, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, it's really powerful for you, because if all the farmers in our state are going to just stop selling their water rights, leasing prices are going to go through the roof.
Right.
Because with the growing population, I mean, they're going to start needing more and more water. But if they're not able to obtain large amounts of water at a time, they're going to have to lease water from farmers who are going to contribute just minimal amounts, which they're going to have to pay more and more money to you farmers, which are ultimately going to help you in the financial struggles that you might be having.
So as a farmer, what if someone comes to me and wants to buy my water rights and they don't give me an option to lease? Then where would I go?
Maybe you.
No, go for it. You got it.
Maybe they're not aware of the option to lease. So maybe if you were to give them that option, and maybe you can already have a drafted lease for them, and they might be more willing to have that option with you.
That is one thing that we want every farmer and rancher to be aware of, is that this is, like I said before, it is relatively new. And so a lot of people aren't aware that you do have many legal rights, as we did touch, and financial, and a little bit of legal, is that you are allowed to make any contract you want. I mean, you are the sole proprietor of this contract. You get to say when, you get to say how long, you get to say how much. And you also get to form regulations to it. So if they pull 30% really quickly, they're done. And the 70% is yours to make your crops.
Interesting.
Yeah, it seems like leasing has way more options, obviously, than selling it.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more flexible, because once you sell it, I mean, you essentially don't have that. Yeah, you don't have the rights to that water anymore. It's gone.
Is it like, if I own a ranch, right, and then I sell the water rights, is it once I die and I don't have my
No, you can pass them on.
pass it on generation?
Yes, I mean, it's pretty much like anything that you can have in a will.
Okay.
It's just like pretty much a substance that you can hold that's
It's
your
gonna have
property.
revenue
Yeah.
Yeah,
for as long as.
exactly.
Which is why the duration of a lease is very important, because you can go, like, I'm just gonna go from April 1st to August 1st.
Right.
And they can pull whatever they're set from then. So if they don't pull their 30% within that time frame, it's still over with. So there's a lot of leeway within your lease.
Well, my family's been ranching around here for 4 generations, and having you city folk come down here from Denver telling us what we ought to be doing gives me a little bit of trouble. So I wonder how all this is going to work out. You're putting a lot of responsibility on us poor, ranchers 4 generations down, and our kids are leaving the farm. So having that money in hand really helps to take care of that. You're telling us we ought to lease. I don't know all about that leasing. It costs a lot of money to hire lawyers, write the contracts, and figure it out. And you even said in your presentation that leasing might not provide enough of an economic benefit to make the capital investments that I need to make. So who's going to tell us how to do that? Who's going to tell us about the opportunities for purchasing the equipment, buying it on time? And municipalities don't always all think that leasing is so great. What are they going to do? Tell their households, well, that guy didn't want to lease his stuff to me, lease the water rights to me this year, so you just have to be a little bit thirsty. I'm wondering, here you are at our convention telling us that we ought to get smarter and we ought to be more ethical. What about everybody else? And who's going to help figure this stuff out? Even the really interesting example you showed, the Arkansas Valley, was that it?
Yes.
That obviously took people working together. They had arranged to build infrastructure. They must have some issues around timing of leases. If I act individually letting a lease, that's not going to produce that Arkansas Valley effect. That's going to take a whole bunch of people working together. How do I do a conservation easement? So you're telling us to be ethical, but how about in the next part of your presentation here, the next time you come visit us, tell us a little bit about who all the other people are in government and nonprofits who are going to help us poor farmers. We're selling our land, our water rights, not because we want to, because we have to. So show us something, help us out.
So I'm going to try to answer your question as best as I can. I understand the struggles that you're going through. I came from a small town in Colorado called Akron, Colorado. It's a very small farming community of about 5,000 people, which is why I felt the need to get educated on this and become a consultant with my colleagues to come and inform you. Because I see the struggles that you're going through on a day-to-day life and the financial struggles that you have. But also, from my standpoint and our standpoint, we have to consider our future generations. I think you said that you had kids, and I'm sure they're going to have kids. And if we're all just to sell our water rights now to be more comfortable in the present time, our kids, your grandkids, perhaps our grandkids are going to be fighting a battle that they didn't cause because we were too uncomfortable with the financial crisis that we were in now, which I understand. It gets tough. Like you get backed into a corner, and sometimes it seems like there's no options. But I just implore you to consider the generations of your family that are to come and how much worse it would be for them to have no food at all and have to be looking for new ways to farm when our farmland is already dead.
And another thing touching on that, with the conservation easements, they do have nonprofits that are working on it, and they have made over $5 million in nonprofit money that is going towards getting some of these farmers and helping them with getting their land on the easements. And it is little to no tax deductibles to get that, and it helps the farmers with kind of producing what they're doing and get them on those tax breaks and get them on the easements.
You know, there was this big fancy ethics professor up in Laramie named Tim Mazer. I don't know if you ever met him, but he says, just let the water fall where it falls. Nobody should own the water. You know, it's going to fall, it's going to flow, and just let it be. What's wrong with that?
Well,
My family's had these roots for 4 generations. What do you mean?
Well, but yeah, you're going to ranch or you're going to have sheep and cattle? What are you going to do?
I'll
You grow
touch-
crops or sheep?
We're a rancher family, never mind all those crops.
So to touch on I am a third generation, I'm actually not, third generation rancher myself, can't talk. I'm actually from Denver, Colorado. I'm from Rosette, Wyoming, small town. And I know how tough it is for city folk to come in and say, hey, don't touch my rights, don't do this.
Yeah.
And I understand that, and which is also similar to Greg, I got educated on it. And I've been there. I've been when the tractors broke down, everything's broke down, and you need money and people are asking for it. And some other alternatives that we have, and I mean, these aren't the most beneficial, is if you do need quick capital that much, we want to implore you not to sell whole. I guess if you are in that, if you need to get the tractor running, maybe you could sell something as small as 5 acres and then lease the rest. So that way you have that immediate capital and then you still have consistent income.
Maybe Washington should just come in and build a wall.
There we go.
You know, take the land. They can do that. The Constitution says it's eminent domain.
There we go.
What about that?
You'll have a revolution here in this valley.
And then letting the water fall where it may is to just kind of touch on that. We've done that for a long time now, and as we are seeing,
Ever since there was water.
yeah, and now as we're seeing, as water gets more and more scarce, it's time to start, I believe, going away from that
Yeah, but
philosophy.
hang on. There's the same amount of water there ever was. It's just in the wrong places. We just got to get it to the right places.
Okay.
Agreed, but I mean,
Like Denver.
it's one of those, it's almost tough to say where it's needed more. Because sure, there's a growing population that are in need of the water, but us farmers, all of you, need it just as much to produce the goods for that population. So I mean, it's a fine line between deciding on who needs it more and when they need it, where they need it.
You just want to maintain a dinosaur way of life. You guys, you know.
I mean, we're the ones pushing for you to kind of
farmers.
change the ways that have, I mean, been in our state for so long. So it's.
So it can never change because it's always been that way?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, I'm imploring you to change because it has always been that way, and we're starting to see all this time come, and it's getting thrown back in our face.
So I think it's really smart that your consulting team is coming to speak with us and getting ahead of the curve and giving us this information. If you think about it just globally, so I'm from India, and I can tell you that water is such a scarce resource that people are purposely blocking off dams to redirect water to get to their farm site or even to get to a city community because people are dying for water. And so I think it's smart that the U.S. and different parts of farming area are starting to think about this because it really is going to be a fought over commodity very, very soon. It's going to be World War III. And so I think it's a good conversation to have, and I appreciate your consulting company coming out and speaking with us about this. I do agree with my fellow rancher over here that I think that the recommendations can be more supported by giving us scenarios, so maybe like a what-if scenario. What if I were to lease 80% and the other 20% not? Then what are some companies that can support me in doing that? What would that structure look like? How long does it take for the paperwork to happen? How much would that cost? Do you have a recommended company based on your research as a consulting company? So I'd like to see some of those this is what your world would look like if you do go for leasing. That would be good to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we've touched on it a couple times now, and like we said, this is a relatively new theory, and more, as we said, it's going to start blowing up, and we can definitely see potential entities starting to fill those needs, wondering, what is your best option? Is 80%, 20% the best, or is 60%, 40% the best? And just exploring all your options, and we definitely expect those entities to be created and to be very informative.
So if I'm only using 20% of the water that flows through my property, and I decide not to sell it, not to lease it, what happens to it? Where does it go?
It'll go downstream, but the government can take it away from you.
If you don't use your water rights, essentially the government can come in and they can take your water rights away from you because you're not using them like you essentially came and told them you were.
So if I only use 99%, they can come and take
No,
it?
there's a lot larger gap for...
Rebecca knows the
Use
time
it or lose
frame.
it kind of thing.
You have to use the majority of it within, uninterrupted, which means if you don't use it for a year's worth of time, then it goes away. And the government has the opportunity to take it and start redistributing those water rights to other people that are willing to buy it.
So I use it right up to the deadline, the day before the deadline, and then I use a lot of it.
It's a lot of water to use in a little amount.
It's a lot of water.
Which,
I guess you could flood irrigate.
see-
I guess you could flood irrigate the
And the
day
down-
before you lose it.
The downfall of doing that is if you get on the curve early and you understand, okay, I only use 20% right now, you can get on the curve early and say, all right, I only use 20%, I will lease you 80%. You have income coming in, you still are in control of all 100% of your water rights, and the government has no option to take it away because you were in constant use of it, whether it was leased or whether it was not.
And at the end of the next year, you can pick how much. Maybe the next year it's a dry year and you need a little bit more of that water. Then you can keep 30% to yourself and lease out the other 70%.
What if it's like mid-season and there's like a unforeseen drought and you needed more water, and you're leasing too much of it out, and you're like, crap, I need that water back.
And that's why in your contract, we strongly recommend the seasonal to seasonal
seasonal.
option, and rather than doing
4 seasons, or is it?
4 seasons, yes, yes. And so, like Naya was saying before, in spring and fall,
Yeah.
you said is definitely the most popular times. And so you want to just keep those options open, because if you do have a down season, maybe the season before that was very plentiful in water.
Now we have time for one more question.
Oh, sorry. So what if the government starts to see that I only use 30% and I'm leasing 70% for year after year after year? And then all of a sudden they decide, oh, well, she only needs 30% anyway, and they just cut down my supply altogether. Can they do that?
No. It's your water to use. So and it doesn't matter what you do with it as long as you're using the full
Who
amount
decides
of
how much I
water.
get? Who's the...
Is it a majority? Didn't you say majority?
Majority.
So, and deciding on how much you get goes back to the prior appropriation. If you have more new junior water rights, you're probably not going to get as much. In a year where you have a drought, people with older water rights are going to get the water before you.
And prior appropriation has been around since 1874, and they're not going to be willing to change it quickly anytime soon, because those people have had their rights for centuries,
Darn
pretty
right.
much.
Yeah.
So whereas you had a 4th generation ranch, guess what? You're calling the shots.
Yeah, you're good. Your water
Right
rights
now.
are probably
You
from the
calling
early
the shots
1800s.
right now.
You're good to go with your
Who would
As
y'all
long as I keep
recommend
dumping it
that
out.
who would you recommend that us farmers start to build partnerships with if we wanted to lease?
Personally, I mean, the Front Range community in Colorado is growing at incredible rates. It's astounding how many people are moving into our state. Cities like Fort Collins and Colorado Springs and Denver are just growing at such high rates that they are needing more and more water. So ultimately, I think we at Cowboy Consulting think that they are probably going to be the ones that are going to be willing to pay more money in return, so give you more money from season to season or year to year, whatever you agree on with them.
Fort Collins is just using it to make beer.
Is there something wrong?
It's pretty good beer. It's pretty good beer. So
All right, guys, that's it for the questions. Take a deep breath. Good job.